Welcome to Bee Gees and Me. I'm David Fedor. Today, I'm with Jesse Jackson of Set Lusting Bruce, a Bruce Springsteen podcast. Jesse, welcome to Bee Gees and Me.
I am so excited to be here, David. You were kind enough to be on my show. We had a great time talking Bee Gees and sharing great stories. And so I was thrilled you invited me to join you on yours.
What I'm going to do, you mentioned that I was on your podcast and we talked about fandom and things like that. And I appreciate you coming on to return the favor and talk about fandom and Bruce Springsteen. But I brought you on under false pretenses because I'm going Bee Gees versus Bruce Springsteen.
Okay.
We are going to have a little bit of a debate right now as to who is better. Now, obviously, music is a subjective thing that Bee Gees or Bruce Springsteen, neither is better. And it's my show, so Bee Gees are going to win regardless.
Absolutely.
But for the sake of it, I just want to run through some tail of the tape, and we could take a look at some of their careers, and we could see who is better. So the Bee Gees have released 22 studio albums, had 83 singles, 2 live albums, 15 compilations, and appeared on 4 soundtracks. One of those, obviously, was 1977's Saturday Night Fever, which puts the brothers Gibb at an estimated 220 million records sold during a career that spanned multiple genres and 4+ decades. Bruce Springsteen, very respectable numbers in the same strata as the brothers Gibb. He has released 20 studio albums, 72 singles, and a ridiculous 23 live albums. He also has 15 box set compilations and appeared on 1 soundtrack. He has sold an estimated 135 million worldwide. So, beat for beat, he's right there. 20 albums, 22 with the Bee Gees, 72 singles, 83 singles. The one thing that grabs my attention right away, and we talked about it a little bit already, 23 live albums. Now, that crushes the 2 live albums that the Bee Gees have released, but it also speaks to what kind of band they are, what kind of fun they are, because in those albums, there's going to be different songs and different takes on songs that they released. So my hat's off to Bruce for that.
Yeah, so what's interesting is Bruce started 3 or 4 years ago, and it's on his website called the Live Archives. So they have songs, they have shows from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it's on different tours where for $9.99 you can download the MP3 of the whole show, or you can spend it more. So in a lot of ways, I think that's cheating, because they aren't pressing CD. I mean, they press the CDs if you want them, but it's on demand. It isn't like he's buying the CD, shipping it to Walmart. So in a little bit that is. But yes, he is definitely known. And there is a huge debate on what is the next live archive he's going to do. What I find fascinating is Bruce has never had a number 1 single.
That is very shocking and plays into my next category of head-to-head. It's the Billboard Hot 100 charts. Bee Gees have recorded 43 songs that made it to the Hot 100. 15 of those were top 10 hits, 9 of which reached number 1. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band recorded 26 songs that made it to the Hot 100. 12 made it in the top 10, 0 number 1s. Now, to Bruce's credit, he did write Blinded by the Light, which Manfred Mann took to number 1. So Bruce, as a songwriter, made it to number 1, but as a performer, him and the E Street Band,
never had a number 1.
Insane.
Prince's song stopped him from getting number 1. Now, the question would be, what is more iconic? The 80s, Born in the USA, or the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack of the 70s? You could certainly make the argument that In the '80s, it's Prince, Madonna, uh,
Michael
Bruce, and Michael
Jackson.
Jackson.
Yeah.
That's the top four. Um, the '70s a lot more diverse because it's actually the '70s almost feels like 2 or 3 decades. Like the early '70s, then the middle '70s.
Yeah.
I think by far commercially, uh, there is a story that I've heard is true, that Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, and Barry Manilow early in their career were having dinner. They're having coffee. And supposedly Manilow has told the story. And Manilow made the joke, I will be more successful than you two. And when he said it, I'm not saying I'm better than them. I'm saying the music I write is more commercial
Hmm.
than either of their music. Um, and I think Springsteen, if you ever read there is a biography written on him. He did The River, which had Hungry Heart. It was his first hit. And then he immediately did Nebraska, which was this album that he recorded in his house on a track machine. That's just about serial killers, and it is truly the cool Springsteen fans were like, yeah, Nebraska's my favorite. As they're smoking their clove cigarettes, drinking espresso. Um, and the story is the record company went, oh, okay, this is what you want to follow, right? You just got a little bit, because he had Born to Run, then he did Darkness, and then did that, and then he brought them Born in the USA, and they went, okay, this is a little more like it.
Yeah.
And he ended up with 7 or 8 top 10 hits off the album, and the only reason it didn't set um, going number one is because Prince's was, I think When Doves Cry or Purple Rain, some of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, just not he has not had the commercial success that the Bee Gees had.
Interestingly, the one thing that Bruce has over the Bee Gees is awards. He has cleaned up awards compared to the Bee Gees. So where you say that the Bee Gees have commercial success, they have not had the success from the critics or had the same until recently. When they were at their peaks, they did not bring home the awards that Bruce did. So the Bee Gees have 5 Grammy wins and 9 nominations versus Bruce Springsteen's 20 Grammy wins and 51 nominations. So just that alone is crushing, because at the Bee Gees' height, they grabbed a couple awards for the Saturday Night Fever, but after that, it was all downhill. They each have a respectable number of American Music Awards. Bee Gees have 5. Bruce has 4. In 1994, the Bee Gees were inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Bruce followed in 99. The Bee Gees were Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 97. Bruce in 99. The Bee Gees were named Commanders of the Order of the British Empire in 2001. And similarly, in 2009, Bruce received the Kennedy Center honors. In 2018, Barry Gibb was knighted. In 2016, Bruce Springsteen received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So back and forth they go with some interesting things. Obviously, Bruce crushes with the Grammys, but all the other awards are pretty equal. What's interesting, let me finish.
Please.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. There's one other thing that sets them apart. One other award, one other memorial, if you will, that the Bee Gees have that Bruce doesn't. In 1979, the Bee Gees had a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Bruce Springsteen in 1989 no-showed his nomination and his ceremony and does not, to this day, have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Interesting. So I was going to bring up that, and this is a famous story. He won the Oscar for Streets of Philadelphia.
Yes.
And he went to, his parents were living in California at the time. And if you read his autobiography, he and his father had a very, very rough relationship. His father fought depression and mental illness all his life. And Bruce has had his own battles with, he's very forthright on his depression. But he went to his parents' house and he, set the Oscar on the kitchen table. And his dad looked at it and said, "I will never tell anyone what to do with their life again." Because it was always the GD guitar in the house. It was,
Yeah.
the GD guitar. And then, of course, he was given a Tony, a special Tony Award that for the Broadway. So he was nominated for an Emmy, and I think Bruce could give a blank about the EGOT.
He
But
is
as a
one
fan,
Emmy away from an EGOT.
yes, and I was like, please, please, please. And
Yeah.
and everyone, but what was hilarious, right, is he was nominated with the Lemonade with Beyonce, him on his Broadway, and then a little show called Car Karaoke with Paul McCartney. Yeah, everyone like, oh, Bruce has to win. I'm like, well, that's okay. You're against the freaking Beatle. And I don't know if you watched that special, but it was amazing
Yeah.
watching him tell those stories and everything. So yes, he is one Emmy away from an EGOT.
Well, maybe it'll happen.
Yeah, maybe so.
Well, something that was surprising